Wisconsin Eye's 2014 election coverage is brought to you by the Wisconsin Hospital Association. For over 90 years, a valued voice for Wisconsin hospitals, supporting high-quality, high-value care in communities like yours.
Wisconsin Eye is at the Medford Public Library interviewing candidates in the 2014 elections, interviewing State Representative Janet Bewley of Ashland. She's a Democrat running in the 25th Senate District. Janet, welcome back to Wisconsin Eye.
My pleasure.
Wisconsin Eye appreciates the support of the Wisconsin Hospital Association, which represents more than 139 hospitals and health systems for making it possible. When they think about the mine, here's what you say in your campaign website: environmental health of the region cannot be compromised. Translation: no iron mine?
Unfortunately, not under the current law. Had a different approach been taken and a better bill that made reasonable changes to the timeline and the permitting process, there could have been conditions under which a mine could be permitted. Unfortunately, the legislation that passed went way beyond what could truly protect the environment, allow people access to the decision-making process, and protect local control. So many things were weakened, damaged, removed from existing law that it would, if taken to extreme, allow for damage to the environment and to local communities.
Good or bad development that the Gogebic said last week it's considering not developing a mine in Ashland County and just in Iron County?
Well, I think it's just another moment in time in a very long discussion. They have said similar things in the past and then changed their mind and did things differently. A process like this is complicated, and they are going to respond to different things that they discover. I think it's unfortunate that they appeared kind of petulant in this particular case. It would be difficult, I would think, to mine an ore body based upon a political boundary rather than a geologic one. But nothing is for sure at this point. There's quite a bit more that needs to be done before any permit process is complete. And I imagine that we're going to be seeing many more changes in what they propose to do between now and the end of the process.
Because you were in the Assembly, you voted on the mining bill early last session. So let me ask you this. Your reaction to the disclosure that Gogebic contributed $700,000 not to any Assembly recalls, but to the governor's recall and state Senate GOP recalls. Your reaction?
Well, I think it's very unfortunate. I think that it points to the fact that if you examine what has been presented in terms of the chronology of the events, it looks very, very serious. That $700,000 was contributed at a time when legislation was being very seriously contemplated, and in fact, the contribution was made. The recall did not happen, or he remained in office. Legislation passed that seriously favored the iron mining interests. We leave it to the public to make their decisions, but in the meantime, I know that there are judicial investigations into that very chronology.
Traveling with the mining issue is the issue of frac sand mining. Mm-hmm. Is that an issue of local control, or you've heard the discussion in the Capitol, one, state government setting minimal standards that local governments couldn't go beyond?
I think that when you're talking about anything that is about a resource in a particular community, you always have to include some component of local control, along with environmental protection, along with the ability of local governments to receive revenues. It really doesn't matter if you're mining sand, copper, ore, digging for water, putting in power lines, whatever you're doing, the communities need to be engaged and they need to be an equal partner. I think that one could get dramatic and say, well, you know, the iron issue is more important than the frac sand issue is more important than windmills, wind generation. They're all about the same thing, which is changes being made in a local environment, and how do you set the standard for what should and shouldn't be done.
Let's talk about school funding. If you're in the Senate in the next session, when school funding comes up, what are you going to push for to help rural schools? Because your district is huge. It's bigger than, I think, 2 states, dominated by rural schools.
Well, I think, first of all, 2 things. Number one, from a foundation, look at Tony Evers' fair funding for the future. It isn't what many people had wanted, which was a complete rewrite of how we fund our schools, but it is based on the current formulas, or at least the current ways we go about funding schools, and it does it in a fair way. I would start with that at a minimum, and then I would try to see to it that we could increase the amount per pupil, along with seeing if we can nudge those transportation aids better, and also see if we can do something that is going to assist schools rather than punish schools when they consolidate. Rural school districts are always given this opportunity to consolidate when it turns out that consolidation can come back and bite you. And we've got to protect our rural schools. They need to be able to look at decisions locally that aren't going to come back to haunt them later. I would also want to take a look at revenue caps.
Traveling with this is the future of vouchers and choice schools. Your position?
You asked me a question about how we're going to fund the schools that we have. Very difficult to figure that out. I don't think that we're in a position, in terms of the kinds of revenue that we're getting in, to be able to distribute that revenue to private schools. It opens up so much uncertainty for the existing schools. It spreads a finite amount of revenue to places that very, very often are not regulated and don't have the accountability that private schools have. And we have seen that many of the vouchers that have already been claimed are going to kids who are already in private schools anyway. So we're not increasing opportunities rather than subsidizing the families that have chosen to go to private schools in very, very clear areas, very certain parts of the state. For now, I would probably leave Milwaukee and Racine as is, but I would not be in favor of seeing vouchers go any further.
This summer, as you know, Governor Walker asked that the Senate and the Assembly repeal or withdraw Wisconsin from the Common Core standards. Your position?
No, I think that's a kind of a tempest in a teapot. I think it's an effort to distract people from the more serious conversations about how we fund our school, and instead incite fear in people to look at something else about the schools to be worried about. There's nothing wrong with a foundation upon which local school districts can build a curriculum. The Common Core does not build curriculum. It sets a foundation, and I think that local school districts are perfectly capable and under Common Core have the ability and the power to build a curriculum that makes sense for their kids.
Your campaign website says we need better state and federal highways, and well, let's stop there. There's a projected $600 to $700 million deficit in the state transportation fund in the next biennium. Mm-hmm. How should it be filled?
Well, from the get-go, we have to figure out how we're going to get revenues into the state, and if we are going to continue to neglect our state highways, we are going to find that we're not going to be able to have the economic vitality that we want. I think that we need to find some ways to get the large corporations who have found ways not to contribute revenue in the way that they have in the past. We desperately need that money. They're a player in how we go about funding our roads, and we need them to participate in keeping our transportation system strong. Local communities also need those transportation aids kept at a level where we're going to be able to maintain our town and county roads as well.
Would you consider raising either the gas tax or the $75 you and I pay to register our vehicle?
I think we have have to look at all sources of revenue when we're going forward. And there was a major study that was done a year ago on how we fund our roads, on the entire transportation budget, a very thorough and bipartisan study recommending that very thing, that we look at the gas tax, that we look at fees, and that we must increase the amount of money that comes into the state. Now, we're going to be having a vote on the constitutional amendment to protect the transportation fund, but if there's not enough money in the fund, that constitutional amendment isn't going to do much good except to keep that small amount of money being allocated where it belongs. We need to increase the revenues.
One aspect of the health care funding is this. As you know, 1 in 5 Wisconsin residents get their health care from Medicaid. Mm-hmm. The American Hospital Association says our reimbursement rates in Medicaid, second lowest in the nation. Should they be increased?
We should have gone back to the very beginning when we could have received more funding from the federal government. That was a mistake of horrendous and mythic proportions. Not too late to correct, though. We must begin by going back and getting that federal money for Medicaid.
Fiscal Bureau estimated today that the next biennial budget could be more than $1 billion, although there are a lot of varying factors short. If there is a deficit, how should it be made up?
First of all, if there is a deficit, there's a lot of explaining that needs to be done. Surely from one budget to the next, we're always going to need to be making adjustments and anticipate that it's not going to come down to the penny. But with the bragging that's been done by those that are in power right now about how there will not be a deficit, that there will be jobs increase, that the economy is going to get on the right track, rather than just focus on how we're going to make it up, I would ask for an accountability of why that happened in the first place. We've been expecting so much more out of the current administration than we're getting. It's going to be important and necessary to explain why this happened yet again. We can go back and blame former administrations, and that will also be done, but we need to ask this administration why. We have got to make sure that the state of Wisconsin receives revenues from all of those who are participants in the benefits that the state offers, and that includes corporations.
The bill is coming back to legalize medical marijuana. Now Colorado, state of Washington have legalized recreational use. Your position on those issues?
I don't think we can go anywhere near recreational use until we figure out a good way to find a medical marijuana bill. That's going to take time. It is a very complex piece of legislation, and it is loaded with concern and opportunities for people to be either overly zealous or overly frightened. We need to be careful, we need to be fair, but we do need to proceed. There are many, many people who need access to medical marijuana.
First offense drunken driving, should it be a crime?
I've thought long and hard on that, and I know that there are people who believe that first-time offenders should be thrown away and you lock them up, but no, it can't. We have very effective treatment alternative courts. We need to be able to save people before we throw them away. A lot of people can take that opportunity, that moment when they have offended for the first time, and they can literally turn their lives around if we give them that chance. Drug courts, alcohol courts work well. We need to have more of them, and the fewer people that end up just by some misguided approach to zero tolerance. We just can't have more people in jails that aren't getting the help they need.
Your campaign website calls for economic development programs targeting businesses with 25 or fewer employees. Mm-hmm. Why do you have the number 20 or 24 in there?
Well, it could, you can convince me to go a little bit higher, but, if I look at the businesses in the North that really are positioned to grow and expand, they typically have 5, 10, maybe 15 employees. And so many of the opportunities that the state has are for companies that are higher than that, much higher than that. And I wish that we could have a carve-out for those small businesses that are doing well, that are ready to ratchet up to the next level. I would hope that we would be able to actually have a small business focus that can take place in northern Wisconsin. There's a small business, the annual small business conference that the governor is speaking at is in Racine. Earlier, the annual small business conference has been in La Crosse and Green Bay. I mean, there are great small businesses in northern Wisconsin. They just need access to what Wisconsin has to offer.
And finally, do you want to highlight any differences between you and your opponent on November 4?
All I can tell you is what I know about myself and the fact that serving in the legislature is very real, very important, and very hard work. I'm about to finish my second term. There is so much more to be done, and I have learned how you go about doing it. I would love the opportunity to represent the Senate district. I know that my opponent points to a business experience, but nothing takes the place of having been in that body, working hard on legislation, serving on committees, understanding how bills are written, and most importantly, striking compromise when compromise can be made, rather than sticking to ideologies and making large claims that you can't back up. I really want to go back and do more.
Thank you. State Representative Janet Bewley of Ashland is a Democrat running in the 25th Senate District. Janet, thanks for talking to Wisconsin Eye.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.